Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this big old guy right here. This is the Benchmade Crooked River. First off, I want to thank my buddy Christian for giving me a great deal on this. Much appreciated, Christian. Next thing, size comparison. This is a big one. Absolutely 100%. Here it is next to your Spyderco Delica, dwarfing your Spyderco Delica. Here it is next to your steel wheel cut jack, 3.5 inch, dwarfing the steel wheel cut jack, 3.5 inch. Right here, the Ontario Rat #1, also much smaller. And actually, let's compare it to a couple of other big ones. Right here, this is the ZT0452CF, so you can see the blade length is slightly shorter on the Crooked River. And then this is the Benchmade 710, which is another big old Benchmade, right about the same in the blade length department. And so, anyways, there we go. And let's go on ahead and just jump into it and talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of your Benchmade Crooked River here. So on the good side, first off, I do like the blade on this very much. This is a very nice blade shape with some nice flat area here, some nice belly up at the top here, a very good transition between them. I like this blade shape, and with this swedge, a little bit of clipitude here, it's a very attractive blade shape, 100%. The steel on this guy is S30V, which is a great steel. It is absolutely solid. It is good to go. No real complaining about S30V. Maybe it's not ideal for sharpening in some situations, but look, it's a fine steel. No problem there. It has relatively thin stock, which is nice. I mean, I appreciate that even though this is a huge knife, the stock on it is actually still a little bit thinner than, for instance, the PM2. So that's very nice. And it does actually cut things. It is a little thicker behind the edge than I maybe would like to see, but using this guy on cardboard, no real concerns whatsoever. So this is not a huge knife that has completely lost track of the ability to, actually cut things in two, which is something I appreciate very much. So that's great. Next thing, this is actually nicely designed for the pocket. Even though it is very large, it is not necessarily that crazy in the pocket, partly because look at how it's built here. The clip goes this way, the rest of the knife kind of slides off to this side, and then the knife itself is hanging out sort of against the back of your pocket here, which is something I appreciated. This guy is absolutely a huge knife, but it doesn't feel as big in the pocket as you might otherwise expect. So it's clearly been well designed in that way. Next thing, the axis lock, as well as having it on washes, adds a certain layer of simplicity, if you will. That simplicity, I don't even know why I said it that way. Anyways, it does, because it's going to be more resistant to gunk and dirt in those kinds of environments. The axis lock is a strong thing. It's been a little while since I looked at an axis lock knife that was not doing anything fancy, and there is a certain appeal. So I appreciate that very much. The other thing that the axis lock brings us here is the ambidextrousness. This knife is completely ambidextrous. It is drilled for tip-up or tip-down carry on the right side. I'm sorry, it is drilled for tip-up carry. Whoa there. Tip-up carry on the right side of the left side. There is no tip-down option on this guy. I'm not crying. You might be. But this knife, because it's an axis lock, is completely ambidextrous. With ambidextrous studs, a lefty will get the same experience of this knife as a righty. So that's nice. Price on this guy isn't honestly bad. It's $200, but that's a very large chunk of S30V. An interesting design, some titanium, some nice little touches, details here. I don't really feel like Benchmade has made some pricing decisions I don't agree with, but I don't really struggle with this guy. Given the size, given everything here, I feel like that's a fine price, and so that's a-okay. Then finally, on the good side, this particular knife is actually pretty good in terms of quality control. Benchmade's had some issues in that department, but this one was given hand-selected at a store by the previous owner, but it is still nice to see a very well-tuned piece coming out of Benchmade here. This has a nice, kind of relatively fall shut, smooth action, even though it's not been used all that much, so it'll get even smoother over time, but there's no blade play, vertical or horizontal with that. So that's very, very good, and I appreciate that. And so all of that combined is the good of this guy. It's this one's fine in QC. Price isn't so bad. The axis lock on washes does have an appealing simplicity, including the fact that this is perfectly ambidextrous. It's nicely designed for the pocket, and it has a very nice blade. Let's talk about what's great here. To me, at least, what's great about this knife 100% is the aesthetics. I love the look of this knife. This is a beautiful knife. I am a sucker for wood. I will tell you that any day of the week. I love seeing modern knives that are using traditional style materials. And so even though this is a diamond wood sort of thing, it is a resin and wood layer plywood sort of thing, it looks great on this knife, and it really does add something to it. And then coupling that with the old school clip point sort of thing, this really does feel like a modern knife from a bygone era, if that makes some kind of sense. They've added in the orange things, which, I'm okay with. I don't necessarily particularly love the orange, but I can see, particularly if this is meant for a hunter, having that orange would make this a little bit easier to spot in a woodland setting if you drop it on the ground or something. But even like the black clip on this guy, black clips will tend to show wear a little bit better, but I think it blends in with the wood nicely here. This is just, to me at least, a beautifully designed outdoorsy sort of blade. I love very much how this knife looks, and I think that's absolutely spectacular. And so, frankly, I think right now some of the most beautiful knives that Benchmade is making are coming out of this hunt lineup. And so I got to give praise there. This is a very, very attractive knife, and to me at least that's what's great. Let's talk about what's bad here. So on the bad side, first off, this guy is absolutely huge, 100%. The blade length on this guy is 4 inches on the dot, which is going to make it illegal in a lot of places. The knife itself is very, very large. I mean, it looks almost comical in my relatively small hands, and it's just, it is gigantic. And similarly, it is also a little bit heavy, too. You're coming in at 5.23 ounces. That's not as bad as some knives, but compared to other options, even out of Benchmade, for the same amount of blade length, this guy is absolutely 100% huge and heavy. So that's one thing. This isn't, but those are very personal. You might not mind that at all. Next thing, this is a nitpick, but I don't like these backspacer design, because what they have here are parts of the backspacer that are below the liners and parts of it that are above, and so as a result, it doesn't really seem like it fits all that well. I'd kind of like to see the bottom of the backspacer flush with the liners. Look, that's a nitpick 100%, but it just comes across like, wow, they installed the backspacer too low here. Again, complete and total nitpick. A little less of a nitpick, the thumb stud on this guy is 100% in the slicing path. If you're cutting into something very deep, the thumb stud has the opportunity to kind of grab on it there, and that's not something I particularly love. It's something that's very common in Benchmade's knives, but there is a joy to having the thumb stud on the other side of the plunge grind, so that way you're just never going to hit that thumb stud. You've got enough blade here that you can probably avoid it, but still, bugs me a little bit. Next thing, this has a little bit more lock stick than I'm used to coming out of a Benchmade knife. I have even used a little bit of extra, try and get some lubrication on there. I've run it dry. It's just not changing. And so even compared to a couple of other Benchmades I have on the table right now, this guy has a great deal of lock stick, which I'm not particularly in love with. Hopefully it'll wear in, but it is a thing. Next thing, this is a little bit on the thick side behind the edge. If we take a look at the sharpening choil area here, yeah, this isn't an oh my god super slicer. It will absolutely cut cardboard and whatnot, but I would like to see them come a little thicker, a little thinner that is, and maybe even start the grind up a little bit higher. I think that would make this maybe a little bit more compelling in some slicey situations, but again, if they're meaning this to be an outdoorsy, harder use knife, I can kind of get that. So that's not a big deal. One thing that is a really big deal, and the last thing on the bad list, is that if you have smaller hands, the axis lock is not really well placed. What I mean by that is an axis lock requires you, in order to operate an axis lock, I'll use this little guy, the North Fork, which is in the same lineup. To use the axis lock, what you do is you grab with your index finger and your thumb, or one or the other, and then you press the knife back against your palm here. So that way, there's just this kind of pinching action. The knife is being pushed back against your palm by your thumb and forefinger, and you got the other fingers here to stabilize. Whereas on this guy, because it is so damn long in the handle here, I find that for my hands, I can't actually do that. I can't reach with my thumb and forefinger and still have this knife be in my palm. And so what I end up having to do is kind of grip using the other side of my thumb and hand here, and then try and use this, and it's just really awkward because these fingers want to be up on here because there's not a lot of blade here. And so a couple of times I've had close calls here. This is 100% unique, I think, to somebody with smaller hands, but it is something to consider. Even relative to some of Benchmade's other knives that are in the same size range. The 710 here has at least enough slope down here that I can get in there and I can still do this, whereas the Crooked River really doesn't. And so this is a knife that is really big, and it's big enough that the axis lock starts to be problematic for people with smaller hands. So that's something you got to really keep in mind. This is not a knife for you if your hands are built like mine. Let's go into the ugly. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that's all the bad, is that the axis lock doesn't really work for small hands. It's a little thick behind the edge. There's a little more lock stick than I'm used to. There is a thumb stud in the slicing path. This backspacer looks like it was installed wrong, even though the rest of it seems like it was installed right. And it is huge and it's heavy, but those may not be bad things for some people. Let's talk about the ugly here. So on the ugly side, first off, unfortunately in the last few years, it's 2017 now, Benchmade has had a real trouble with quality control, and as a result, I recommend that you always buy a Benchmade in person. That way you can make sure that the knife that you are buying, the very specific one, doesn't have any vertical or horizontal blade play, that it swings very freely as you're using the axis lock there, and that there are no other issues with it. And if it does have those issues, you move on to the next one. You can also use an online retailer who's willing to select to those criteria, but as a result, that's an extra step with Benchmade that doesn't often need to be the case with other makers. I'm hoping that they're going to turn a corner and they're going to bring quality control back, but for the moment, make sure you buy it in person or from a retailer who's willing to do quality control that Benchmade seems to have been forgetting to do. On the other side, actually on the other side, this is unrelated to that. The other ugly issue, though, is that this is a seriously unwieldy knife for me. What I mean by that is that this is a knife that I feel like, more so than any other large knife that I've handled lately, is kind of hard to control. It feels very strange to use and to handle. The balance is not the problem here. The balance point is about where you would expect, right up here. But I feel like it's actually the distribution of weight. Because when the knife is closed, this area here, containing all this metal, the pivot and whatnot, is way heavier than the back side of the knife. And so you have this really center-heavy knife that's very, very, very odd. And so this could 100% be a consequence of my small hands. It could be that once you use this with hands that are reasonably sized, you're going to love it. There's not going to be any kind of problem. But for me, at least, this, although it's a detail, is kind of an important detail. And it means that even relative to other knives that are very, very large, even from Benchmade, the 710 here, the Crooked River just doesn't feel right in the hand. It feels like, oh, ew, I don't want to try and control this. It's really hard to explain. What this just means is that you want to go, while you're handling it in person to make sure the QC is good, you want to make sure it feels good in your hand, because if it does, then no freaking problem. Disregard this entire thing. So anyways, that's the uglies. At least for me, whatever way that the weight is distributed here makes this guy seriously unwieldy to me. And with the QC issues, you're probably still best buying in person or from a retailer who's willing to help you out there. Let's talk about your final conclusion here. Look, final conclusion, this is indeed a very nicely made knife. It has a beautiful design, and I think it's a nicely made tool. It's a good, honest cutting tool, and that's great to me. And indeed, I think if you pick one of these guys up because you like the size, design, whatnot, it will be a tool that'll serve you well, as would be the Mini Crooked River, which Benchmade has said is coming in the future, which I'm really looking forward to, because this design at a more manageable size sounds incredible to me. But the thing is, to me at least, this is a knife that I really did not enjoy using. Carrying it was fine, but using it just drove me a little bit nuts. And I don't think this is actually about the size, because there are a lot of huge knives that I've loved. I mean, even right now on the table, this guy, the 452, is an incredible knife. The Benchmade 710, another really, really great piece. But this guy in the middle, the Crooked River, there's just something crooked here. It doesn't handle that well. It's hard to control, and for me, at least in my hand, the axis lock is just not well positioned. But again, that's a little bit specific. So if I wanted a huge knife, I would take a Benchmade 710 or a Contigo, a 452, an Alambic Swish, a Shiro 111 every day of the week over this guy. Not because I find it a bad tool or because I find it unattractive or anything, but just because it doesn't quite handle right for me. But the thing is, you have to consider the source of this information. This could be something that is absolutely not a problem with bigger hands. Maybe if your hand goes all the way up to here, it's perfectly balanced, it's a knife you're going to love for the rest of your life, yada yada. Maybe I am completely alone here, and let's be real here. Me reviewing a 4-inch knife is a lot like asking a squirrel to review the ergonomic comfort of a reclining sofa. But take this with a grain of salt, but go handle it yourself. That's kind of the important thing, both for the quality control side and to see if you feel the same thing. Because if you pick this knife up and you're like, no, that's great in my hand, then buy the freaking knife. If you handle it, you love it, you should do it. Because it is a fine piece that's well made and is very, very attractive. But for me at least, and maybe for other folks like me, I think there is something a little bit crooked with the Crooked River. And if you're feeling the same thing I feel, I think even Benchmade's got a lot of other options that may serve you just as well, if not a little bit better. So that's kind of where I land with the Crooked River. It's a great knife, it's a great tool. It's probably not a great tool for everybody, and you need to figure out whether you're that everybody or not. Hope this has been interesting. Sorry I can't be more widely ranging in my my perspective here, but alas, it's hard to escape one's bodily habitus and whatnot. Hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.